When coaching, we often will facilitate what we call as a best practice, where we actually practice the coaching conversation as well as design a coaching plan when we're working with our clients. And one of the things that always amazes me is people will say, I've talked to this guy or I talked to this person and it didn't seem to have any effect on them. And it always amazes me that a lot of times we hold ourselves accountable to having one, maybe two conversations with someone, and we're expecting someone to improve their sales or change their attitude or handle angry customers more effectively. A good coaching conversation is a series of interactions, not just one. So let's take an example of somebody that we're coaching with a negative attitude. One of the jokes I love to crack is people with negative attitudes have had years, if not decades, of practicing that attitude. One or two conversations with you or I is not going to be suffice to build predictable, sustainable change. In this case, a positive attitude. Now, the second concept to having a good coaching conversation is to focus on one area. And every time I suggest this, people always ask the question, but what do you do when they have so many things to improve upon? I said, focus on one thing at a time during your conversations. That does not mean if we're coaching a salesperson on handling price objections that we can't help them improve prospecting or needs-based selling or handling angry customers. But when you're having a series of interactions to form a good coaching conversation, it is recommended you focus on one area. Now, if you happen to be a golfer, there are a million things going on in a golf swing. What would happen to your ability to absorb, assimilate, digest, and ultimately put into action if your golf instructor or your golf coach covered 15 to 20 different things in every single golf lesson? Would you really be able to apply? Would you really be able to put into action all of those things fluently and flawlessly? Probably not. Now, the third thing is, remember, you can use supplemental coaching. Those are coaching methods that don't take you any time at all. So, for example, let's take a salesperson who's lacking confidence in handling price objections. One of the things that you can do is have a one-on-one coaching conversation. You can focus on it with that person for a series of 8 to 12 weeks. Now, the supplemental coaching could be interviewing someone who handles price objections really, really well. Or maybe getting them a book on how to handle price objections, which is a form of self-directed learning or coaching. So a good coaching conversation is not just one conversation, but it's a series of conversations that build upon the prior one. The second thing, it focuses on one area. And last, it leverages alternative or what we call supplemental coaching strategies to help that person improve, specifically in the area that we're coaching to. So the coaching conversation is very interesting. And a lot of times people say, boy, these 4 steps are kind of hard to digest. Well, one of the things that we all hear from our clients and we all say to each other is, we need to build greater accountability. They need to have greater ownership. So let's take a customer service agent who needs to handle angry customers more effectively with confidence. Number 1 and 4 is nothing more than a learning project that is tied to 2 things. 1, the area you're coaching to, which is in this case handling angry customers with confidence. And the second is to something they're already doing, which is what? Handling angry customers. So the learning project could be as simple as, John, I want you to come in next week with an example of where you handled an angry customer really, really well, and what did you specifically do? And then number 2, maybe one looking back, you didn't handle as well as you would like. So I go to the opposite effects when I create learning projects, but it's specific to what he's already experiencing, angry customers, and the second thing, to the area that he's coaching to. And that's handling angry customers. It's very simple. Number 1 and 4 are not items that you cover really in your coaching conversation. So next week, John would come in and I would say, John, last week I asked you to come up with the following items for me. So let's talk about it. You're immediately in the discussion phase. And questions help us clarify and understand our employees. The worst thing that we can do is make assumptions. And recently I was at a client site and I had somebody say, well, what if you know they just don't care? And this client was coaching someone with an attitude-based issue. And I said, well, how do you know they don't care? Well, you can just tell. I said, well, how can you tell? And everybody in the room looked at me really funny. And she said, well, sometimes you can just tell. I said, no, I'm actually asking you because sometimes we make assumptions. Let me give you an example. How many times have we looked at someone, and let's stereotype, that we think is really good looking, and they don't give you the time of day? And what do we do when we walk away? Oh, they're arrogant, they're dismissive, they're snobby, they're self-righteous. But later we find out they're shy. And so this client looked at me and you could see her thinking about it. I said, what I hear you saying is this person provides a perception of not caring. Because in reality, do you really know if somebody cares? Has this person come up to you and said, oh, by the way, boss, I just don't care? She said, no. I said, so think about that for a second. So when you have your discussion, ask the question, John, if I were to share with you that you really give off a strong perception that you just don't care as it relates to XYZ, how would you react to that? See, the word perception protects you, but it starts a discussion of discovery and clarification. Now, I'll give you an example, not from that client, but from another client who brought up the exact same thing. And this person had a really good coaching conversation. And what came out of it was no one ever taught this person how to handle this situation. So every time the situation came up, and it was a form of an angry customer, is that his frustration would go through the roof. So he'd kind of get the customer off the phone pretty quickly because he didn't know what to do. But he gave off an impression he doesn't care. The activity is where we facilitate change. Knowledge, teach me what you do to handle angry customers. Skill, let's practice it. Let's both play the role of the customer service or the sales agent. See, the thing about employees is they're not going to go practice on their own. They're not going to facilitate change on their own. What we have to do is have very targeted conversations. And what we have to do is focus on one area so we have sustainable, predictable improvement. We have to focus on that one area because once that's mastered, for lack of a better description, they become more willing to explore other areas to improve. And their confidence in pursuing those areas improves. And then ultimately, the 4-step coaching model builds accountability, clarification, greater acceptance of change, and ultimately employee ownership.